Hi, I'm Johnny Smith, host of the Inquisitive Minds podcast. Join me while we interview all manner of interesting people from all walks of life. Some conspiracy, some cryptozoology, and just some things that are just plain interesting. Every week I'll have someone with me who is an expert in their specific field.
This is the Inquisitive Minds podcast.
Hey, thank you guys for tuning into the Inquisitive Minds podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Smith. With me this week, a very special guest of mine. He comes all the way from Erie. He's a stand-up comedian and the man behind Off Constantly Comedy. Welcome to the podcast, Anthony Morelli.
Man, thank you, Johnny. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing today?
Perfect, man. I'm living life well. We got a bunch of beer from Rochester yesterday, and I've been outside most of the summer, so I'm a pretty happy individual.
That's what's up. Sounds like a nice day. I was just in the bathroom looking at my mouthwash, and I'm almost done with the bottle I'm using. And the next bottle I'm starting probably tomorrow is a new brand, so I'm feeling pretty fragile at the moment. So you have a fascinating tale for me today. The story of Ed Gingerich, the first Amish person convicted of homicide.
Yeah, typically Amish people kind of take care of their own, but this was a unique story where the state police had to end up getting involved, and a lot of gory, crazy things happened. And then let me ask you before we actually get into the meat and potatoes of this story, what connection does it hold to you? So I ended up moving out there in Mill Village, and this is kind of where all that happened. I moved out there, I think, a year after all of this happened.
And that was in 93, 94?
Yeah, 93. We moved out there, and it happened just months prior, actually. That's okay. Yeah.
Well, then let's not spoil the story. We got your connection. Why don't you hop right into it? Tell us a little bit about Ed Gingerich.
So for people out there that don't really know Amish, like I grew up in middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. And we had a bunch of Amish communities around us. They're people that are very strict in their religious belief, but don't really believe in electric. They think that is what brought the devil into America. And so they don't do any of that, and they're very, very secluded. They stick within their own communities. They don't really pay taxes or anything like that. They're recognized by the government, but we pretty much just kind of leave them alone. So Ed Gingerich and his family, Ed was 18 at the time, and they moved to a little place out past Mill Village.
Now, do you know where they moved from?
My house. Yeah, a lot of Amish came from either like Michigan or Ontario. I think they were part of the Michigan people that kind of kept migrating. A lot of Amish moved to Pennsylvania and Michigan and these areas, and in Ohio. When everybody first came over, but they kind of trickled down when the New England states were really like strict with their religion. We're like, we'll keep going. And that's where they settled in.
Quakers and Puritans and what have you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like they kept going further south. The Dutch and the Amish settled in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and into Michigan, and some into Canada too.
Yeah, they're fascinating people. I see them at, usually like the bigger flea markets selling homemade either goods like wood furniture or a lot of food. And the food's delicious. I'll say that. But it's hard not to stare. Like I grew up in Pennsylvania, so I've always seen Amish people. It's still hard not to stare, like looking at their clothes, because I know that they made it. So I'm like, I wonder if she stitched that dress, or like her sister stitched it, or who made these guys' pants.
Hand me down or grandma.
What is it? The no mustache until like you can't grow a beard unless you're married.
Yep.
And then they don't have mustaches, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's only
so they're the anti-Morelli.
Yes, they are. I grew that specifically for this podcast.
For this episode. Okay. I actually went and got my haircut today, and They said no beard trims. We can't line up your beard at all. The mask has to stay on. I said, wow, that is a waste of time.
Yeah, you don't have a whole. Did they give you half price at least?
No, they charged me for the full haircut. I mean, they did the top of the head. They just if they would have charged me for a beard trim and not engage, I would have went absurd. They said, well, we should have. In theory, you should pay us for it. Go fuck yourself.
I've actually had an Amish girl try to hit on me, like while we were returning a ladder.
First off, that's a very sexy setting right there. We were returning a ladder. Go ahead.
I brought it,
you know, most times I don't. She was like, we lost you a little bit on that one. Can you say that again?
Yeah, like I took the ladder out of the truck and she was just sitting there picking weeds and looked up at me and winked and blew me a kiss. And I was like, no, your dad.
You mean to tell me you didn't want your butter churned?
I walked away from that. No way.
You know, I have enough trouble.
It's not worth it.
I have enough trouble in social situations with age appropriate females now. I don't know what I would even try and say to an Amish girl to be like, entice her into a relationship. Have you heard of air conditioning? I don't know. Honestly, we're so far off topic right now, it's not even funny. We're having some technical issues here, guys. Hopefully, Anthony gets reconnected with us here.
Still there?
Yeah, we're still here. You still with us, buddy? Just bear with us, folks. We're trying to keep this moving along.
My connection's strong. Can you hear me?
Hello. You back with us? All right.
I'm back with you, I think.
Okay.
A little bit. Yeah, there we go. I see you. Oh, yeah. Well, that's
there
a good
you go. He was 18 and they
topic.
moved to that area.
Yeah, so they moved just a little bit south of Mill Village, and they essentially started the Brown Hill community, is what it's called. So it was the Gingerich clan, the Gingerich family that primarily lived there, but it was called the Brown Hill community.
And that was just an Amish community?
Once they moved there, yeah, several families will live in a certain amount of acreage around each other, and that kind of becomes a community.
Okay.
So it's just a bunch of families close together around, but they all moved there, established that, and it was a very like traditional old Amish family. Nothing like Mennonite that kind of adapt or allow some flexibility of rule. And Ed hated that. He is not.
So they had to be strict. If other Amish communities looked at them as the old-fashioned Amish. That sounds like really old school to me.
Yeah, like they were like the first sect of Amish. Yeah, so that it's nothing that is bound to adapt to anything. It's the Bible and the Bible only. So Ed really kind of raged against the machine, so to speak, raged against the family, but was still on a Babel mill. So he moved there. He meets Mary, he meets Katie in the fall of '85, and Katie's 21. And for Amish girls, that's really old to not be married yet or have a prospect of marriage. So she's feeling pressure from the elders in the family, and so is Ed, because they needed him to settle down. So
she was like 21. She was an old maid. He was 18.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he married, but about the age that most guys will, but he didn't like it. They got married in '86, but they had their first son in '87.
Okay.
And Ed hated it. He did not like being a father. It was not his dig. He didn't like all the work that came with it. He enjoyed trying to be lazy.
See, parenthood's not for everybody. Do you have kids, Anthony?
Especially the Amish. Yeah. They have kids to work. I don't.
Do you have children?
No.
No, I don't either.
We have dogs,
Um,
and that
that's
I have
partially
zero
because I
children.
have no
So
interest at the moment. I think I would be a great absent father, though. I have stood in the mirror many times and said my baby mom ain't shit. Just to practice, I say fuck these kids all the time. I even wake up sometimes and say I just want to make my daughter proud, knowing damn well I ain't got no daughter. I can understand though. Kids are they're a
see,
blessing, but they also
I'm
change
already
your situation.
like, oh yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I feel this. I'm the exact same way. Like we're working on kids, but it's definitely going to change a lifestyle for me. But I already am like in dad mode, so I am ready for it. Like I look at the lawn lovingly and like admire it after I cut it, and then I gotta cut. I have this battle going on with my neighbors to where if I cut it, then they immediately cut it, and I can get a fucking day
Oh,
self
it's
to
back
just
and
admire
forth.
my lawn. It's a real war, man. It's a real war.
I don't
But so back to
I
the
don't
story.
understand that trouble.
We have
I
about
don't
an
relate
acre
to
and a
that at
half of the
all.
house here, so
I live in an apartment, and my landlord has some crazy guy cut it whenever he feels like it.
that we got a lot of land. I've taken down 25 trees so far, actually,
Yeah,
this summer.
that's impressive. I did a year logging, and man, oh man, was that rough work.
Yeah, we heated our house primarily growing up with wood, so we
That's
had
what I
to
was
cut and
doing.
split it all.
We were cutting and splitting it all. A lot of it by hand, and
Yeah, that's what
I
I've been doing strictly. I have,
I ended up ripping my abdominal walls that year.
good golly,
Yeah, man,
holy
it's what you
moly.
get when you're a little He-Man.
I get that, man. I try to do shit that I should be doing at the age of 35 right now. I know that.
So
But
he did not gracefully fall into fatherhood. He landed face first. Hated every minute of it.
yes, did not enjoy it, the new hours of waking up and stuff like that. So he ended up just going and building a mechanic shop. Now you may wonder, they don't believe in electricity. They believe in gas powered motors because gas can be made by man.
Oh, okay.
So like they have like lumber yards, sawmill, stuff like that, but there's like no
But
electric in
he
there. There's
wasn't
no
working on
light.
cars or anything, was he?
So he would work on small engines. He wouldn't really work
Okay.
on cars, but he'd work on like tinker with chainsaws, stuff
Lawnmowers.
like that. Yeah,
Okay.
but he just built like
Generators.
an encased shop. I think it was something like a 10 by 15 area to where, or it may have been even smaller than that, like 8 by 10. That was his shop, but he didn't really build any windows in it. So that's a key part of this story because they start first noticing changes in Ed's behavior to become more drastic. He built that in uh, uh, the early spring to summer of 88, and they noticed changes in him by July of 88. So
By
he's in
July of
this,
'88.
yeah. So just a couple of months, they already see this change in his mood swings. He's tired. He's agitated all the time. He just pretty
Well,
much
the
comes
thing
in and goes to
is,
sleep.
if you're not using electricity at all, and you build a building without any damn windows, uh, what are you doing? You just want to
He
go in
just
there
what?
and hate the world in the dark?
Yeah,
Let
yeah.
me get my
He wanted to be
candles
by
ready.
himself.
This is
Yeah.
nonsense.
So he would work on that, for hours and hours with all this stripping agent for engines and auto part or not auto parts, but little parts for lawnmowers or something like that. He makes friends with a couple of they call them the English community, where it's
The
just like you
normies
and I. Yeah, you and I out there trying to chat with them. One of
were
these
corrupted.
normies ends up trying to convert him to Christianity, like the new way.
Oh,
I didn't catch that.
all I said
So
was,
yeah, so
oh.
he built this shed, this mechanic shop. Well, that makes it a lot easier to respond to. He built it. So his wife now, Katie, starts seeking help. She goes, I need someone to see Ed, but she doesn't want to take him to like a modern medicine doctor. So they end up taking him to a local chiropractor just down the road. And this guy ends up just like
that's a hell of a
cracking
deal.
his back and going, yeah, cracking his back and goes, okay, drink some blackstrap molasses in a week.
Molasses?
And does this times. Yeah.
Now,
yep, that,
I maybe I'm a little ignorant on it, but is molasses, from what I understand, it's like a thick, gooey. Is it drinkable?
It's almost like you would take a spoon and like dig it out almost, but it's runnier than that, and then you would just lick it clean.
Huh. So they said
it was gross.
They said, here's your options. There's a guy who went to school for 12 years to work on the human body like a mechanic does with a car. Or you can check out this guy that did a seminar and cracks your back.
Yeah. And treats most of the Amish
funny
community
story.
with more
I got my
glasses.
Yeah, that's wild. It's like, do you like honey? Well, here's something completely make you miserable. When I think of molasses, I think of people getting tarred and feathered.
I think just gross. It's never been good. It's never associated with a good thought for me.
Oh man, I've always wanted to rub my body in a vat of molasses.
You drowned.
I feel like that's the height of opulence. Just molasses everywhere.
Yeah, but you ain't getting out of that. That's the problem.
That's a flex. That's a flex no one else is touching. Be like, bro, you ain't fucking with me. I got molasses money.
You should do that in front of the Amish. Just take a bath in the blackstrap.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even need to see no chiropractor.
I'm so healthy. All my demons are gone.
Yeah, so obviously that didn't work. Like, at all.
You don't say.
They would keep going to him because they didn't believe in the English, in the modern medicine type of thing. But now we jumped into probably 92 now, and throughout this time he's still complaining of symptoms, still out in the shed with this gunk material, is what it's called, and that keeps him feeling gross. So the first real effects of the actual gunk came in 1992. Ed just keeps saying that he has this big. He started having these visions, actually, where he was kind of hallucinating and going crazy. He had these visions of where he was instructed to kill their bishop, the community leader, essentially, the elder, and that he needed to talk to his spiritual advisor and to Jesus about accepting Jesus into his life. So getting
let's hold up right there 1 second. 1 second. So he needs to speak to a spiritual advisor and skips everything else and says also a direct line to Jesus.
Pretty much, yeah. He says he needs to talk to Jesus to accept him in his life.
Okay, I need straight to Christ. None of his fucking lackeys. I need the real guy.
Yeah, okay. he figured demons were talking to him now. This all trickles down. Like, this David Lindsay guy is the one that is his English friend and keeps talking to him about Jesus and converting. And then he's still in the shop with this gunk. It's the brand name term, but it's really bad. And it's a non-ventilated
So the chemicals
shop,
are okay.
Kicking into effect. That's kicking in his hallucinations. They often thought he may be schizophrenic. Like, he went into fits to where he would get down on all fours and run around the house like an animal. He has a couple of more kids now, actually. And in March of 91, maybe March of 92, they actually have to call 911 on Ed. And Ed Kate punches Ed in the face and knocks him down on his back.
Katie punches Ed in the face.
Yeah, she had enough of it to where she just cracked him one, and he went
Good
down
for
on the
her.
ground, and then all the brothers like on him and shit, and then they got an English guy to call 911.
Oh man, there's the like, ooh, don't touch. Let the demons of that phone enter you, buddy.
Yeah. Well, then, so they actually take him to Hammett, our local medical facility, and put him in the, insane room. They start prescribing him meds. But Ed seems normal in the beginning. As soon as they get him into the room to be questioned by the doctors, like Katie and her father warn the doctors, they're like, he's crazy, he's a madman right now, we don't know what's going on. And they enter the room, and Ed is quiet, courteous, and kind. And then as soon as the doctors leave the room, he like looks at Ed or at his father and Katie, and it's just like, I know what you're trying to do. And
so it sounds like he knows what he's doing.
Well, it ended up the doctors came in and then into an episode, saw that he was manic, and received him and started to really evaluate him and take their claims seriously.
Okay.
So it's
I wonder how many other Amish people go throughout their lives with undiagnosed mental illness. Now that you mentioned the possible schizophrenia.
Oh, crazy amount, because a lot of the Amish it's known for their inbred communities because they keep it within the family essentially. So cousins, and that ends up where you see a lot of special needs Amish children because they either hide them or take care of it themselves. So
that's fascinating.
Obviously, there's communities that don't do that, but growing up, that was a known thing. Like the Amish did it themselves, so you never saw their flaws in public, like ever. And special needs is considered a flaw, so to them. So okay. He ends up being in the psych ward, giving him meds, and Ed's after 2 weeks, he's released and prescribed med, and for the first few weeks he takes them, but then he starts feeling the side effects of the like antidepressants, of the new drugs, and he hates them. Doesn't like the effects at all.
They're not helping him out at all?
He thinks that, well, they are, but he just doesn't like the side effects of them. They've kept the demons at bay, essentially, but he hates the effects. So he thinks he's like being an English guinea pig, and so has doubts herself because she never wanted to go to the medical community anyways. She just wanted to stay with the chiropractor or all natural methods. So he ends up not going to his psychiatric appointment and stop taking his meds. But
now we cut you off where you said Katie did something about his medication when he wanted to stop.
She backed that decision. She was she supported him stopping taking his.
She supported him stopping taking his medication.
Correct.
Okay.
So it slipped into depression and psychosis, and he starts pulling out his hair because he thinks it's on fire. But they let this go for months, unchecked, back to this little blackstrap molasses and stuff. And this is about early 92.
So early 92.
Yeah.
He's dealing with his unchecked mental illness. He's back in the unventilated shed. Probably a full-blown episode, I'm sure.
Yeah. So he's going crazy, pulling out his hair, saying how he's going to kill himself.
Literally pulling out his hair?
He ends up hiding. Yeah, because he thinks it's on fire.
Oh, that is I don't know what that is a sign of, but it is nothing positive.
Yeah, it's not a good time for anyone. And he has several children now by this time. that all this is happening. So it's all happening in the house in view of the children with the wife, and this is consistent.
Anthony, let me stop you
he's
for a
going to kill
second.
himself.
Let me stop you for a second before you go on. That is what blows my mind, is that they're having such a rocky marriage from the start. He had a child, didn't like the child, immediately started becoming a less developed person. Started becoming more secluded, more angry, having more episodes. Yet they found time to continue having sex and making children.
It was like they thought that more children would calm him down.
Wow, that is an absurd thought.
It's the Amish way.
Okay. So you're telling me he starts telling people he's going to kill himself?
You have to settle down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I should preface some of this that it wasn't he was crazy 24/7. He still did work. He ended up engineering. That's why he got a mechanic shop and started divulging into that. He helped plan and build the family's lumber shop, and it was one of the state-of-the-art ones. Like, communities came from around to check out the shop that he helped build. Mentally, but physically, he hated doing everything. He tried to do as little as possible. When his father and his brothers helped build his new house for Katie and him, he was no part of it. He didn't help at all. He was out either planning the lumber shop or in his mechanic shop. So he was
nice.
Kind of the black sheep. Yeah. Well, they didn't appreciate that. But
I imagine a lazy Amish man is looked down upon.
Yeah. So now Ed is saying that he's going to kill himself. Katie ends up taking all the guns out of the house, and that freaks Ed out. Ed's brother and father show up, and Ed ends up taking off throughout the house, but he's been in such a depressive and manic state that he's so beat up that he makes it 100 yards out of the house. And then his dad and brother just pick him up and put him in. They tie him up.
Now, we lost you for a second there. Now, when she took the guns out of the house, that freaked him out, and you said he ran out of the house? All right, we're back, hopefully with a better connection to keep it going for you guys. Now, Anthony, from what I heard before you cut off, she took the guns out of the house, and that freaked him out. Now, you said he ran out of the house after that?
Yeah, so he ends up freaking out, but he's been in such a manic and crazy state for so long, his body has just deteriorated, and he is just beat up. So he ends up running out of the house because his father and brother come over and are going to take him to the doctor, to another medical doctor, this time in Jamestown, somewhere different.
And now, are they planning on taking him to a real doctor?
Yeah, again. So he went to Hammond.
Jamestown, where's Jamestown at?
Relative to us, it's about 45 miles away. It's just across the border in New York.
Okay, I wondered if you were referencing Jamestown, New York. Shout out to Jamestown, New York. I'll be performing their stand-up next Saturday.
Oh, dope, man. Good luck. That'll be it's a fun atmosphere. Jamestown's a lot of fun. But yeah, so they take him, or he ends up passing out in the field. So his brother and father end up grabbing him and tying him up, like hog tying him. So that way, if he wakes up, he's not going to go berserk or whatever, and then just take him to Jamestown. He sleeps.
That's a hell of a way to take somebody.
Yeah. He goes into the room without incident, but goes into an episode, passes out, and reawakens and just tears the medical room apart, like goes nuts. So they know he's nuts. He ends up talking to the doctors and saying about Katie and his brother. He goes, "When my brother blew into Katie's cunt, I saw an angel fly out of her mouth."
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful visual, but good Lord.
It was his brother, yeah. So the doctor gives him a tranquilizer and puts him in a padded room. Now, this is March of 92.
Because that solves problems.
Yeah. They're just, hey, wake up, take out your aggressions. It'll be okay. But it was 1992, and we're all idiots. So, yeah, March 92, he ends up leaving the hospital 4 days after all that happens. They're like, yeah, he's fine. I'll just put him on meds and he'll be good. So he again just stops taking the meds. And Katie supports the decision again. It's modern medicine, and that is very frowned upon or not believed or trusted in the Amish community. So they would rather go back to the blackstrap molasses than have him take his medicine. So he ends up living, and winter comes, and Ed's health worsens, and Ed's father thinks that they should try again the modern English medicine because he thinks that's the best option.
He's getting pretty desperate.
So now it comes into, that was the winter, and Ed's father would go back and forth with him, back and forth. And then he ends up now we're getting to the meat of the story, in March 16th of 1993, Ed has a long talk with his father. And Ed finally agrees to see a doctor, but makes the father and brothers promise not to put him back in the hospital. He'll go to an appointment, but he doesn't want to go back into like a psych ward.
Okay.
So he agrees to this. Now we wake up the next morning, and the brothers actually talk to taking Ed to a special healer, an Amish special healer instead, and not an actual English doctor. But
so like a holistic medicine type.
Yeah. So the guy's name is Jacob Troyer, and they end up going 100 miles to see this guy. And Jacob Troyer sees Ed, tells Katie to take him to a mental hospital, and there isn't much he can do, and also states that he thinks Ed will commit suicide. So this guy, this Amish healer,
like a drastic answer.
Go to modern medicine, go to the hospital. This man is really bad.
I don't got no snake oil for this type of crazy.
Yeah. So they end up just taking him back and kind of dealing with the news of we should take Ed to the actual hospital.
But still not actually taking him.
Because the next day there's a family wedding in the community, in Brown Hill community. And nobody has told Ed about this because they know what kind of state he's in. They don't want him there because it's a celebration. So they just don't tell him about it at all. And it ends up the next day, the wedding day, Ed stays in bed until like 9 a.m., which for Amish people is unheard of. Like, you don't do that.
He slept the day away.
Yeah. But he then goes
My uncle used to call me at 7 a.m. And if I was sleeping, he'd tell me I was wasting the day, and he'd say, get up and do something with your goddamn life.
My dad did the same stuff growing up. Like, as a teenager and wanting to sleep in until 10 or 11 because you're up until 5 or 4 or whatever, he'd be like, you're missing out on everything the day has to offer. What are you doing? Get up, do something.
Yeah, it's 10 a.m. You've already wasted half the goddamn day.
My dad got less and less pleasant about waking us up and would just shoot at groundhogs or crows. Early in the morning when he saw him in the field, he would just open a window and pow, and the whole house would wake up.
I will say, though, I'm thankful to that. It was my Uncle Tim. Because of him, I have a hell of a work ethic. You know, pre-corona, my schedule was 5 a.m. to 1 a.m. every day.
Dang,
so
that is insane.
Shout out to Uncle Tim for instilling a strong work ethic in me. And at this point, rest in peace. On to a more pleasant, or I'll say a more entertaining story of death. The Amish fella.
So yeah, the day of, this is March 18th, 1993. So Ed wakes up at 9 and ends up wanting to go over to his father's house to talk to his father about what's going on, and says God hates him. He can hear the devil and not God anymore. So
not for nothing. A lot of this sounds like, and I'm not trying to malign anybody, but like an angsty teenager.
It's delved a little bit deeper because by this time he's now what 24, 25, living a man's life in the Amish community. So I don't think there's much time for him to have acts of rebellion or to be an angst teen. I think this is a deep dive into a depression, a manic enhanced by chemicals and pretty much a warfare against his spirituality.
Now, obviously, neither one of us are mental health experts. Do you think, though, the fact that there was no kind of wiggle room or outlet in that community is what intensified his illness?
Absolutely.
Because at least in I'll put it as they do, English society, there's wiggle room to fuck up. You can fuck up a couple years. I'm perfect examples of that. Legitimately, all of my 20s were owed to the state of Pennsylvania. So, when you don't have time, I know it sounds iffy, but you got to explore who you are. You got to explore what you want to do, and you got to make mistakes.
I'm huge into traveling internationally as much as I can. Obviously, can't do that right now, but I'm not one to go and do the touristy stuff. I'm one to go and live in the culture and experience the people and try to. Obviously, I'll go to resorts and drink my face off. But when I was in Vietnam, I pretty much lived in Vietnam for 2 weeks with my brothers and just did what they did on a daily basis with everybody and met people. Same with when I was in Italy. So those experiences teach me so much. And to limit that, I think, is a painful thing. We here in the States don't have people that I've traveled more countries than they've traveled states, and they don't get that perspective. And the Amish just strictly are like, you don't do anything. You stay here, you work, you give yourself to God, and that's it.
I will say, as a comedian, I feel like you are wasting the trip you had to Vietnam, because the statement "when I was in Vietnam" is a fucking gold mine.
Back in Nam.
Yeah. Back in Nam.
I should bring up more stories about that.
Yeah, man, you do all this international traveling. Talk about that. Not only can that be funny, but that's also interesting. That's a different perspective than some of us have.
You bring up a good point. Thank you for that, because I really do need to dabble with that a little bit more. I do talk about Australia a little bit.
Yeah, you do. I've heard it. This isn't Comedy Corner. Let's get on to the stabbings.
Yeah, let's get on to the death. So this happens.
Murder!
He talks about maybe they'll go back to the chiropractor, stuff like that. He ends up giving him liver pills and massages his head, and that fixed that.
He said liver pills and he massages his head?
Yeah, that was how they think they were going to fix it. Of Ed, and Ed doesn't take that well. And Ed starts yelling at Katie, and he yells at her, "I know who you are. You're the devil," in front of his brothers, in front of their English friend, and in front of the father. So this is a big deal.
So he's just losing.
And then
he's coming unglued.
Yeah. Then he yells, "I don't want to hurt anybody. I love everybody," and then went to bed. Nap.
And then went to bed.
So he ends up waking up. The wedding's still going on as planned, and he goes to the wedding, and he says it's the only way he can be saved. But then Ed lays back down instead, because his brother Danny brings him back, but Danny leaves to finish the chores that he has to do for the day, but promises to return after finishing the chores.
Okay.
Now Katie's back, and she starts to wash the dishes. Ed gets up from his nap, goes over to her, and just punches her in the face.
Oh.
Just cock back.
Unwarranted. No warning.
Yeah. And then Ed yells, "I am the devil."
Oh, boy.
Katie yells for her son to go get Uncle Danny. And Danny has to run over a half a mile in the snow because it's early March, so there's still snow.
Mm-hmm.
Runs over pounds on the door, Dan immediately grabs his horse and rides back to Katie and Ed's house. And Dan enters to see Ed just mounted on Katie on the floor, punching her face so hard and so much Lord. That there's like, you cannot identify Katie anymore. He looks at Danny and says, "This is what she deserves." He stands up and then stomps his right foot on Katie's head.
Oh, good
and then
Lord.
Goes back down and continues to punch her.
Oh, poor woman.
Dude's going ham.
Yeah.
Dan tackles Ed, wrestles with him, and they both stand up, and Dan is scared. Like, so he grabs the children, or leaves the children in the house, actually, excuse me.
Okay.
And rides to the closest English house to call 911.
Oh.
So he tussles with Ed, but Ed's just in this manic, demonic state.
He's too far gone.
And it's just, it scares the living shit out of his brother. So his brother just needs to go get help. He knows that. After Dan leaves, Ed puts his work boots back on and continues to stomp Katie's head.
Oh man, this is brutal.
Then he proceeds to undress her. He guts her.
Oh.
And puts her organs next to her. He washes himself, and then he throws the Bible into the fire and takes his kids to his father's house, saying to them he's going to be back and he's going to go burn down the house.
So, but he didn't hurt the kids.
No, so he didn't hurt the kids, but he gutted his wife in front of his children.
I mean, yes, that's horrible. And, you know, I don't mean to lessen, you know, this poor woman's struggle, her suffering, or her death. But I know some people would tell this from a bit of a different perspective. Maybe it'll come up in further along the story. But has anyone potentially mentioned possession?
Because of the devil and
the iconography of the Bible.
That was a part of it, but they realized it was more than possession. Like, the bishop was smart enough to realize that this was something mental and something more out of their control. And that's why they sought medical help several times, even outside of the Amish faith of, you don't do that. You fix it within yourself. And they tried the natural route and the English medical route. So obviously there was the thought of possession, but I believe their community was smarter than that to realize it was above and beyond their pay grade, kind of.
Okay.
But with the help of the English guy that was trying to convert him to be a Christian and believe and accept Jesus Christ as his savior, having that constant battle of his family and the bishop versus this English guy and his new ideals and how Jesus accepts and saves, that definitely bled in, because he was using the gunk or in the invented mechanic shop. So this is just chasing and feeding those thoughts that are fighting in his mind to where he becomes almost schizophrenic. I don't think it's a true schizophrenia, because it was more of an induced schizophrenia, but definitely a manic depressive. Absolutely. But less manic and more just actually probably bipolar more than manic depressive. So that is what their family had to deal with. And when he was put on the medications, it was antidepressants. It was, anxiety meds. Mm-hmm. But the side effects of the new drugs back in the 90s weren't always great. And if you felt those side effects as an Amish person who lives naturally all the time, that's weird. And you're not going to accept that, even though it may be working or keeping them humble. Because later in the story, even after this killing, there's much more to unfold. The guy still went a little bit nuts. Like, it isn't just about the killing. This is just the initial kickoff. So
he took the kids over to his father's house, you said?
Yeah. Yeah, where the wedding was.
Okay.
And takes them over there and says he's going to go back to the house and burn down the house. But the paramedic, being the first to respond and see Ed walking his daughter and son down to the father's, and they ask him where he's going. He says, "Where's your wife?" And Ed responds, "My father's," and you wouldn't, or "Where are you going? And where is your wife?" And he goes, "My father's house. I'm going to my father's house, and you wouldn't understand about my wife." And
Oh,
continues to walk. So the paramedics follow Ed and the others to the house, and all are just shocked and horrified. So they follow him back to the Ed and Katie's house.
that's quite a scene to walk into.
Yeah, absolutely. And this furthers my connection to it is the first responders, the fire department that showed up. They are my neighbors. Like there's a book called Crimson Stain about this story, a little bit more, I think, fiction than there was. I think just to beef up the story, there's a talk about my literal next door neighbor, she being a mistress to Ed. I don't particularly believe that because I knew her, I grew up with her.
Scandal sells, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the names in that book are people's parents that I went to elementary school with, that I saw at baseball games and stuff like that, that had to live with this, you know, every day. And that Amish community stays there still. We'll go into it, but they ended up staying there. So yeah, a trooper shows up and Ed tells them he's a bad man. He's the bad man they're looking for. And the cops are like pretty chill. They're like, "Oh, okay, we heard about this manic crazy guy that murdered his wife or whatever." So they ended up
pretty chill about that, huh?
They ended up trying to just put him in the back of the car without putting handcuffs on. And a piece of Katie drops out of like Ed's clothing and lands on the trooper's foot.
Oh.
And he's like, handcuffs, and puts him in the back and everything. So he's taken into custody and taken to the mental ward, obviously. And Ed thought this whole time that the troopers were just going to drive him out into the woods, take him out and shoot him.
Oh, that's what he thought.
Yeah, because
so he was in the back seat bugging out.
That's what happens in the Amish community. Like, I'll get to that in a little bit. But
yeah, because that I've never heard that, and I'm very curious about that.
How you take Old Yeller out back, you take other things out back too.
Okay.
Fair enough. If you do something heinous enough that warrants an execution, they handle it themselves.
Okay.
So we'll get like there's now obviously he goes into court. He gets an attorney that like the prosecution just think that they have an open and shut case because realistically they should. But Ed is able to successfully plead mental insanity.
Well, it sounds like he was pretty mentally insane, you know, so it doesn't seem like it's a stretch.
Yeah. The Ed's attorney state that they were planning to plead insanity, and the defense hires a psychiatrist and claims Ed is insane. That's coming from the prosecution, but they don't care. They still don't take a whole lot of evidence to court. They pretty much fumble it. So he doesn't get off, but the trial begins almost immediately after the murder. The murder was March 18th. 93. Oh, excuse me. No, it takes a year. The trial date start was March 24th of 1994. So it's almost a full year plus a couple of days after all this is happening.
That actually seems very reasonable time-wise for a murder.
Yeah, that was my fault. I just don't know how to read numbers. But so the prosecution doesn't seem to take it serious enough where they make a few blunders. There's no pictures of the crime scene. So you don't really get the impact of what happened. You can say that Ed was insane, but to see the actual physical damage to the body and gutted and to wash himself and then go throw the Bible into the fire, there could be a strong case for the prosecution, but they don't show any of the gruesome details. Instead, they show a cartoon drawing of Katie's corpse. Not like something you would see on a kid's show, but just a graphic. Basic outline. Yeah. And then they bring up less than half of the witnesses than the defense did. So the defense, I think, brought up 12 witnesses, whereas the prosecution only brought up 6. One, obviously, being the state trooper. So Ed's family actually signs a petition stating that they want him to stay in a health ward for good, lock him up.
Okay.
Ed's father signs this. And then so the prosecution brings this to sentencing when it comes to that. And he ends up only being sentenced to 2.5 to 5 years with credit of time served.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's absurd. See, that's one of the stories of someone slipping through the cracks. With time served.
That's because the prosecution took it so lightly or didn't take it seriously enough. And the defense attorney was good at his job. He did what he needed to do for his client, and got him the best sentence that he could. So, like, to the defense's credit, yeah, they did very well for Ed. But pretty much the thing, so a week after sentencing, Katie's father says at dinner, "I wish I could see my daughter," and after dinner goes to bed and dies. So, yeah, a week after the sentencing,
wow,
he ends up croaking. So now in 94, so Ed's been in jail for about 6 months, and Ed claims that he has a visit from God and has been forgiven.
Oh,
yeah. So in March 19th, so the day after he killed Katie, 5 years later and 1 day, he's released at age 34 from serving his full sentence.
Wow. At age 34, he was released. Quick little tangent. I was incarcerated with a guy who, when he got arrested, was convinced he was Jesus. Like, legitimately convinced he was the second coming. They had put him in a separate cell, like, in holding for him to calm down. And he had warned them. He said, "I'm going to punch through the window." And he said, once I took my hand and punched as hard as I could and realized at that moment I wasn't Jesus.
So it's weird how many people think they're Jesus in prison.
Yeah, well, he was going through some real mental health issues.
Yeah.
He was telling me, like, he saw aliens and, like, was standing in the middle of the road stopping traffic. Like, wild story. Haven't seen him since then. Hope he's doing well.
Very cool, man. So yeah, 34, he gets released. He's a free man essentially.
Free and clear, and he maxed out his sentence. It's 5 years. Did he have any paper afterwards?
What do you mean?
Like, did he have any parole? Like
no,
state supervised probation, or he just maxed out his 5 years and that was it?
Maxed out 5 years, and then he ends up moving to Michigan. It's called Harmony Haven in Michigan.
And that's another Amish community?
So that actually, you brought up a good point, because that ends up being, I think, a center for Amish people that are a little bit insane.
Oh, really?
I'm trying to find the actual note on it right now.
Harmony Haven, Michigan.
Harmony Haven, Michigan, yeah. So yeah, he goes there. He lives there for a little while. Then he moves to Indiana. Okay, no. So he moves to Indiana for into a psychiatric unit for Amish who need constant supervision.
That's wild. I didn't even think there was a group of the population like that until today.
Yeah. So that happened in 98. All this comes about, and then it's about 2007. And Ed so it's February of 2007, and Ed moves back near the Brown Hill community
in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so he can try to reconcile with his family, and he rents a home near.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about his time between 98 and 2007?
That was where he was in Michigan, and in the psychiatric unit for Amish people who need constant supervision.
Oh, and he was in there the entire time?
He's in select communities. It's not like he's just had his own free will. He goes to communities that are meant to help troubled Amish. and then ends up actually just going to the psych ward. But then they release him, and then that's when he wants to move to Brown Hill to reconcile with his family. And two of his brothers actually end up kind of forgiving him or trying to reconcile with him and accept him back into his life. The other brother at this time is putting an addition or starting an addition on our house personally, like my my mother's house. So the grandfather or the father of Ed is there, the brother Aaron is there, and then, you know, cousins and workers and such. So all of this is happening, and we find out that Ed has moved back, and it's starting to cause a stir in the community. So come to my birthday is April 3rd. This is now April 7th. And again, they're working on our house. Ed ends up taking his now 17-year-old daughter and kidnaps her and disappears.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Just vanishes. So they stop working on our house for a couple of days because they're freaking out, trying to find his ass and figure out what the hell is happening. 5 days later, they find Ed and Katie, or Ed and Mary, excuse me, that's the daughter's name, safe with...
Just is a little weird. My wife's name was Katie, and my mother's name is Mary.
Are you the next Ed Gingerich? Are you the opposite of Ed?
Well, it's kind of too late for that situation.
Oh man, yes. That's where you get humbled for a second. Oh man. Yep. Yeah.
I love it's so funny seeing other people more uncomfortable about it than I am.
I know you're comfortable with it, but it's just like I should have connected the fucking dots. I've seen your set so many times.
The thing is, nobody connects the dots ever. So I pounce on people all the time. No one ever connects the dots.
Yeah. I thought I was smarter than that, and we just found out I am not.
And you see, I'm ready to pounce on it as soon as it's brought up.
Oh yeah. I fumbled that real well. But so yeah, he kidnaps Mary, but she's safe. They're actually with other relatives in McCain County, so that from where we grew up is probably like 30 miles, if that, 25, something like that.
Okay.
But the reason Ed kidnapped her is because he wanted to try to reconcile with her before she turned 18. And you know how they have like Rumspringa, to where you can go out and explore the community yourself. But then after that, you have to come and commit to the church. Like yes. You get your 2 weeks of freedom to see if you want to join the English community. But if you do that, your family and community shun you and you're out on your own. So that he wanted to reconcile with her before she was forced to join the church and shun him for okay. Good. So they end up catching him. The cops get him. And this is where I found out for sure that they wanted to take him out, because Aaron came to the house after this was done. And he was like, yeah, the cops got him. If we had it our way, they wouldn't have been involved. And they talked about killing Ed, just taking him out because they're sick of his shit. So that was known to us, but the cops get involved. He pleads no contest, and he's sentenced to 6 months probation and a $500 fine.
For the kidnapping?
That's it.
Oh, wow. This guy, just slap on the wrist.
Yeah. So that's 2007. He gets out. The last run-in with the law that he had was in February of 2008, to where game wardens found him hunting, and because he had a felony conviction, you can't have a gun or a rifle.
You're preaching to the choir.
I know some friends that really like shotguns and archery now.
Right on.
Yeah. But he goes back to jail for 3 months. Now, during this time that he's back in jail, the two brothers that reconciled with him reconcile with the Brown Hill community because they got shunned for welcoming back Ed into their lives.
Oh, okay.
So they got shunned, but still lived around there, felt the strain and hardship of not having to be able, or not being able to talk to your family and being a part of that community. So they reconciled with the community and then re-shunned Ed.
Re-shunned.
Yeah.
Whew. This is a very complex story. You know, shun, re-shun, unshun.
It's almost like they don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah. So Ed ends up leaving and goes and lives in a cousins in another town, and then English people protested him coming there. They didn't want him living there. They knew the story, what happened, and then the kidnapping. They knew something was wrong. Something was going to happen again. So he actually ends up moving in with one of the defense attorneys, not the main one, but attorney George Schreck in Cambridge Springs. Now, Cambridge Springs.
He moves in with him.
Yeah, he ends up living with them because George had kept in contact with him, knew he was mentally ill, and knew he needed someone to help or at least be a friend. And then during this time, having his family re-shun him, George brought him back. Now, my dad, like my parents got divorced, my dad ended up dating this real piece of crap human being, but she's the ex-wife of George Schreck.
Oh, okay. Of the defense attorney?
So, yeah, but Ed enters a really deep depression and ends up living with George, but while they're living together, Ed goes out to the barn and ends up committing suicide by hanging himself.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I know not everybody's going to agree with this, but I'm glad the story has a fucking pleasant ending.
Yeah.
How he murdered that woman was fucking awful.
His last words were, "Please forgive me," that he etched into a bucket that he stood on and killed himself.
You know, suicide's a real problem, but I got no sympathy for this fucker. And I know he was probably struggling with a lot of fucking demons and mental illnesses on the inside. But just because someone has mental illness does not excuse them of their actions. And that was fucking brutal. And he did it in front of his children.
Yeah.
And then he showed up again and kidnapped his daughter. She had to be feared for her goddamn life.
I would never want to imagine or have to be put in a situation where I have to imagine that. That's just, when it happened, we couldn't believe it. Like during those 4 or 5 days where they couldn't find her, like you saw the community in chaos, like the Amish community in chaos, and people were so close with everybody because there's a couple of Amish communities around us, so they were all helpful with each other. So George Schreck's wife ends up finding Ed hanging in the barn. But yeah, that's the full story of Ed Gingerich. Most people, Crimson Stain only goes until the murder, essentially, and shortly thereafter. But there were crazy to it.
There you have it. We have a deep dive on the Inquisitive Minds podcast. Good Lord, that was a hell of a story, Anthony. Thank you for sharing it with us.
I hated Amish people so long. Like I had such an intense fear of Amish people growing up. Like I've evolved and learned and it can be okay around them now. But yeah, that was a big part of my life growing up. So
you know what, everything, there was so much that happened there, but just the way he murdered his wife really got me sour.
That's why it stood out.
It's so vicious.
Yeah, and that's why he's the only Amish person to be convicted of murder, is because they had to get the police involved. Yeah.
Huh. That's fascinating. Oh, man. I tell you what, Anthony, where can the people find you?
I'm in Erie. Online, that's what everybody has to do right now. Yeah. So if you look on Twitter, it's Off Constantly Off Constantly Comedy on Instagram, and same with Facebook. That kind of showcases what we do. Like Black Monk Brewery here in Erie, we do a bunch of shows. We had great talent like yourself and a bunch of
you.
other people coming from Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Buffalo. So Black Monk Brewery, we do a show there monthly. And right now, because it's safe to do stuff outside or safer with social distancing, we do that. So check Off Constantly Comedy on Facebook for updates on shows.
Now, let me ask you, why do they call you Off Constantly Comedy?
Because nobody beats Off Constantly, baby.
There you have it. Hey, thank you guys for tuning in. I'm Johnny Smith. You can catch me at facebook.com/tunicanjohn or facebook.com/Inquisitive Minds. I'm also at Instagram at PandaSmith827 at Inquisitive Minds Podcast. Join us next week when I have a very special guest, Trevor Austin. Will hopefully be in studio with me as we debate the moon landing. He's a stand-up comedian out of Pittsburgh, and one of his famous bits, he's a guitar comedian, is about never landing on the moon, and it has bugged me because I strongly believe that we have landed on the moon. So join us next week. And Anthony, thank you for coming. Good luck, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Appreciate it.